Very grateful to you for taking the time to join us tonight. I think we've got a number of people from all manner of different backgrounds and experiences, which is really good. I think we've got people who are very much involved in the provision of education and training from universities and colleges and private providers. So, really good to get your perspective on this particular topic. You're very interested, I'm sure, in terms of what the requirements are and in terms of how you think you can actually provide the assurance that we require as a regulator. We're also looking to make sure our requirements are proportionate on that basis. Really keen to hear, obviously, from students and trainees directly affected by this, how you think your views can be incorporated and the key issues from your perspective. And those of you who may be already operating as pharmacists and pharmacy technicians and members of the public as well, in terms of the key aspects of quality assurance that you feel are most appropriate. So hopefully you'll find this an informative presentation. I'll encourage all of you as individuals or as part of organisations to be responding to our consultation, which is obviously open for a number of weeks yet. But without further ado, I shall hand over to Alex to take you through the presentation.
Brilliant. So really nice to have you all here, and thank you, Mark, for the introduction. So I'm Alex Lescaian. I'm the Education Policy Manager at the GPhC, and I'll take you through what the proposals are in terms of quality assurance of pharmacy education and training. So, yeah. So before we go into the actual quality assurance aspect of it and what the proposals actually mean, I would like to set the scene by talking about education as one of our regulatory functions and how this fits with the quality assurance itself. So the Pharmacy Order 2010, it grants us the power to set standards for pharmacy education and training, which includes standards for course providers, for example, higher education institutions delivering an MPharm degree, as well as standards for students and trainees, which we refer to as the learning outcomes. So the standards for providers are basically our requirements for the organizations seeking approval to deliver or organizations that are already delivering a pharmacy course. And this includes requirements such as regarding selection and admission of the students into the course, as well as the design and delivery of their curriculum. The learning outcomes, however, describe the level of competence that each student and trainee must be able to demonstrate in order to successfully complete an approved course. So, for example, they'll need to demonstrate understanding and implementing of safeguarding procedures, things like supporting patients so they make safe and effective use of medicine and medical devices, or things like demonstrating effective consultation skills. The Pharmacy Order also grants us the power to approve and reapprove courses of education and training that are delivered by organizations in line with our standards, and also the power to refuse or withdraw approval for those that don't meet our standards. So we currently approve courses in two ways, which is accreditation and recognition. So through accreditation, we quality assure all of the processes around the management and delivery of of course and program, typically for pharmacist courses, such as the MPharm degrees and postgraduate independent prescribing. We do this to make sure that the course meets the relevant GPhC education and training standards. However, through recognition, on the other hand, we approve national qualifications. They're normally delivered in Great Britain and follow the requirements of a relevant regulated qualification framework, as well as agreed national occupational standards or other recognized frameworks. And this type of approval typically applies to pharmacy technicians, pharmacy support staff. For this, we do not directly approve the providers that deliver the qualifications on behalf of the awarding organizations. However, what we do is recognize the quality assurance processes and policies of the awarding organizations and the ability to meet the relevant GPhC education and training standards or requirements. And finally, the Pharmacy Order grants us the power to obtain assurance that the standards are met by the providers. So we do this through our approval processes known as accreditation and recognition. And this involve events that are led by an appointed approval team and take place once every 3 years. So now that we spoke about our regulatory function regarding education, I would like to go through our current approval process and methodology. So this will hopefully help you understand better how this looks like at the moment. So through our current approval process, we essentially seek assurance from providers of pharmacy education and training once every 3 years. And this involves submission of evidence, it involves reviewing the evidence, as well as carrying out an event, agreeing on an outcome, and recommendation for the registrar, as well as an outcome being signed off and report published for the said event. The evidence is vast and it depends on the nature of the event. So, for example, for reapproval events, we'll ask for evidence against every single criterion that is in our standards. So there would be, for example, standard 1 would have criterion 1.1, 1.2, and so on. While for the interim events, we'd only ask for evidence at the holistic level for each standard. So there would be no need to break down to criterion level. So it would only be standard 1, standard 2, and so on. So the evidence is usually submitted in the form of documents, and this can include the curriculum and assessment strategy of the provider, the admissions and recruitment policies, external examiner reports, as well as placement agreements. The event itself is carried out by an approval team, which is formed on professionals who have expert knowledge in the field of pharmacy, and this includes pharmacists, includes pharmacy technicians, academics, as well as lay members, which tend to include people from other professions such as lawyers. These events are of high scrutiny and involve meetings with the staff as well as the students, either remotely or on site. And the purpose of this is to gain to seek assurance their standards and requirements are met and they continue to be met. So based on the findings, the approval team, what would do it, they would agree on a recommendation to the GPhC registrar on whether or not they approve the provision of course of education and training. The approval may be subject to conditions, it may be subject to recommendations or minor changes to the course. Following the event, what we do is publish a report, and the report summarizes the discussions held at the event, and this includes the outcomes and recommendations of the event, as well as key evidence that's been submitted against each standard. So basically, once a course of education and training, namely an MPharm degree and a pharmacy technician or pharmacy support staff national qualification, once this is fully approved, it would follow a 3-year cycle consisting of an interim event followed by a reapproval event 3 years later. As discussed on the previous slide, an interim event is a lighter touch reapproval where we will look at standards as a whole, while the reapproval events, we will look at every single criterion for each standard. A second type of approval methodology that we have, again, once the course of education and training is approved, in this case, you'd be an OSPAP, which is for obviously pharmacists, a postgraduate independent prescribing, or a pharmacy technician support staff course. This would follow a 3-year cycle, which consists of a reapproval event every 3 years. However, in this case, there will be no interim, but a full reapproval event each time. So, having explored how our quality assurance processes look like, I would like to talk you through some of the key reasons why there's a need to review this. And one of them is to reflect the changes that have been brought by the new standards. So, for example, experiential learning and independent prescribing are new requirements for the initial education and training of pharmacists under the 2021 standards. And this involves for the first time the accreditation, which is the approval of statutory education bodies as the official foundation training providers from 2026 onwards. Other examples are the new entry requirements to standalone independent prescribing courses, which were brought in 2022, as well as combined competence and knowledge brought by pharmacy technician standards in 2017. Therefore, we must make sure that the processes we use to check the quality of education and training continue to provide a robust, a high level of assurance that's appropriate to the standards. We also want to make sure that we are up to date in the way that we understand quality assurance and the way this is applied to the education and training across the pharmacy profession. And we also want to make sure that our processes remain fit for purpose to each individual course. So, for example, we could use a wider range of data that would help us carry out our quality assurance and monitoring within the education and training of pharmacy. This aim is also part of our strategy, as well as vision, to which we are committed to as a regulatory organization, particularly that of taking a tailored and intelligence-led approach to the approval and the quality assurance. So because of the way that we currently quality assure education and training is strongly linked to events at particular points in time, which indeed do give us an important benefits, such as making sure there is a regular and wide-ranging scrutiny of all the education and training providers against our standards. However, while these events remain important, they mean that we check in with providers only once every 3 years, and during the time that we are not checking in, issues, for example, such as poor performance in the registration assessment, may crop up and reach to a stage where they can pose a serious concern under our standards and the quality of the course of education and training. So for this reason, our ability to spot or anticipate concerns early or to review providers early as a result of the concerns identified is quite limited. So by bringing in monitoring of education and training providers between the approval events, we believe it will help give us a better idea of how the courses are doing between these points. And this will also mean that not only the providers can reflect on and share with us how their courses are going each academic year, but also for us to spot and deal with any concerns and work together with the providers in a more timely and proportional manner to deal with this. And this is on the principle that, of course, prevention is better than cure. So essentially, this requires us to have a system in place for intervention when and where this is needed, basically. This is in the best interest of everyone involved, and includes obviously the course providers, the students and trainees and patients and public, and ultimately will benefit from a high quality of care. So our pre-proposals are basically to introduce early monitoring. The second would be to bring in intervention escalation and decision-making criteria, to have an increased flexibility for approval and intervention, as well as to apply our processes across all of the pharmacy education and training. And I will explore this further in more detail. So, as I previously mentioned, the fixed cycles of reapproval and interim events that we currently have give us little opportunity to spot and deal with concerns early. This can mean the students and trainees do not receive the support or the guidance that they need at the time when they most need this. So, although we collect student data every year for some programs, such as the MPharm degrees or independent prescribing programs, which you will see in the green part of the chart, we don't do this yet for all of the education training provision. However, the data that we get, which includes the number of admissions, includes numbers on progression and completion rates, includes data on equality monitoring information, student fitness to practice concerns. However, although this is useful and gives us some level of assurance, it does not necessarily give us the detail that we need if we are to develop the continual oversight that we want to have as a regulator. So for this reason, we propose to build on our existing process, which again you'll see in green, and introduce more comprehensive and structured daily monitoring. So the blue and the purple parts of the chart. And this we believe that this will help us spot and deal with concerns more quickly, and also help assure the patients and the public, the providers continue to meet our standards and requirements for education and training at all times. So in essence, what we're proposing is to build on the early data collection processes and timings they already have, so that there is a single reporting point every year. So this will let us use a more tailored approach. To how we time the approval activities themselves also means that we can adapt the present free early event cycle, so that we can change the timings between the events depending on the results of our early monitoring. This could also mean that providers will need to submit much less information for reapproval and interim events, as things that we would review on a yearly basis will not need to be repeated at these events unless there's an identified need, such as due to a change in circumstances or a concern. In our yearly monitoring, what we look for is qualitative data that we can link to different aspects of our standards. So, for example, we propose to look at MPharm providers' analysis of their admission profile by protected characteristics in order to identify and reduce discrimination in selection and admission processes. Other areas we look at include experiential learning and how providers took on board feedback from their stakeholders, including their own students and supervisors, as well as patients involved in training. In addition to the early submission from the provider, we would seek and utilize data from other sources to help us get a fuller picture and understanding of how education and training went for that particular academic year. So, for example, we'll look at student education experience survey data, such as national student surveys, and develop our own direct surveys with students and trainees, as well as other data, such as performance in the registration assessment, and whether there are any upheld concerns for our own education concerns process. So any concerns that may arise from early monitoring would be considered on the basis of whether their impact has potential to be significant or just minimal, and whether their effect is immediate or would it be delayed. A quality assurance team will work with members of the approval team to determine and deal with any concerns and provide an outcome to each provider with appropriate feedback. So the roles of each team is further explored in the following slide. So our proposal on this one is to introduce yearly monitoring means that we'll need good decision making. And in order to do that, we also need appropriate ways of dealing with concerns for it to be effective. So we appreciate that every situation may differ, and so can the approach to dealing with challenges in education and training. So for this reason, what we do is intend to use a case-by-case approach for when we review daily monitoring return from providers. So with any concerns that we find, we will consider both their impact as well as the effect on the education and training that they provide. So after we review the returns, we need to make sure that any concerns are dealt in with the most effective way and that their impact on the delivery of education and training is as low as possible. Therefore, we propose to use four main ways of doing this. So they would be asking the provider things like asking the provider for more evidence, or having a meeting with them to discuss a concern, or in the more extreme cases, have a visit. So in terms of decision making, the GPhC Education Quality Assurance team will carry out the initial review in daily monitoring return and the evidence gathered as part of that. So where the team will be able to identify whether there are or there aren't any concerns about the education and training provision, this in liaison with members of the approval team. So if there are any concerns, the quality assurance team in liaison with the approval team will decide on an appropriate intervention activity, such as I mentioned earlier. And this exercise will lead to a report to the registrar, or either to the registrar or the deputy registrar, which may contain recommendations or conditions that the provider must meet. The approval team will consider then whether the recommendations conditions have been met, or in either in full or in part. So if the approval team decides that conditions have not been met, the issue will go through the registrar to the council's quality performance and assurance committee. They will consider also any further action that may be needed. So this may include, for example, another visit by the approval team about the specific issues, or even bring an event forward. So early monitoring will lead to more flexibility in the way that we quality assure education and training, which means that not only that we will be able to intervene if there are concerns and work with the providers to help deal with this quickly, also that we are proportionate in our activity and focus our resources where they are most needed. So interim and reapproving events carried out by our approval teams will still be at the heart of our quality assurance processes, as this allows us to take in all-round view of the education and training provided to confirm whether the provision is suitable for approval. But we also believe that it is important to provide the assurance that to the public that all course providers are visited regularly. So as we want to achieve a balance between regular visits with the ability to be more flexible in our approach, and a greater focus on providers where our early monitoring shows that there are issues to deal with. So for this reason, while we propose to keep our pre-early cycle as our usual approach, we will change this depending on how each provider performs in the early monitoring and or the intervention that they had. So to give an example, providers that don't do well with will have their events brought forward, so we can intervene more quickly, while providers that do well will have their time lengthened, so their events will take place at a later date. This is because positive early monitoring outcomes may give us sufficient assurance, and this could reduce the need for an approval event in 3 years' time. But later, for example, it would be 4 years' time, could be. So any areas that show good progress through early monitoring may not need revisiting during the events, and also delaying events when there's good progress evidence through early monitoring may also free up time and resource for the provider so they can concentrate on continuing to deliver high quality course. The example that I'm providing on screen gives an indication on how the quality assurance schedule may look like in different scenarios. So, for example, a negative annual monitoring outcome in year 1, which is flagged in red, but with a positive intervention outcome in year 2, which is flagged in green, will keep the interim event where it is. It also shows that if any remedial measures put through monitoring and intervention fail, such as year 5 and 6 in the example, the next event will mean a reapproval, which will have the power to give conditions and an outcome on the course's approval status, and whether it can or cannot continue to keep its approved status. So also to know that in our proposals, we mentioned the term exceptional interim, which means that, for example, when an interim event would have otherwise been planned to take place, for example, instead of year 7, due to the provider having a negative intervention outcome, this means that a regular interim event might not be focused enough to address the concern. So the regular interims look at each standard as a whole, as I mentioned earlier, not at each criterion. So as a full reapproval event would. So our proposal to use exceptional interim events in such situations is to allow accreditors to concentrate on certain standards to a criterion level and focus where the issue is to rectify without needing to carry out the full reapproval event. So, for example, if the concern in early monitoring was around OSCE's assessments, the intervention was not successful, then the next exceptional interim would run as normal, but with a greater scrutiny and emphasis on the standard and criteria for assessments. So our fourth and final proposal is to bring every type of pharmacy course that we approve onto the same processes and cycles. And currently, as explained on earlier slides, some courses such as independent prescribing and pharmacy technician provided by private providers do not have an interim event every 3 years like the rest, but a full reapproval event. So as we will introduce annual monitoring, this will give us enough assurance that standards continue to be met by all the providers in an equal manner. So this means that we can bring all of the courses onto schedule, onto a schedule of events such as shown on the screen, and basically means that all courses we approve will have both interim and reapproval events as part of the overall process. So this will ultimately give us a greater level of assurance and a consistent quality assurance approach overall, and you also not put strain on providers or anyone involved in education training. But what I'll do is benefit of having the opportunity for midpoint check, which is a lighter touch event rather than a full reapproval. And this can also mean less paperwork and resource the provider may need in preparation for the events, as well as the review of evidence because the review of evidence spread out and it accumulates due to daily monitoring as well. So in terms of the next steps, so we have launched, so hopefully many of you will be aware, we've launched the consultation on the 4th of April on the quality assurance of education training, and this is running for 10 weeks. Which means that the survey from the consultation will close on the 13th of June. So we are also holding focus groups, quite a few of them actually. They include focus groups with students and trainees, and as well as patients in the public. And in terms of students and trainees, it includes MPharm students and foundation training students, trainees, as well as pharmacy technician trainees. And this is happening this month, and I'll hold these meetings, these focus groups are basically held online. We also plan to present the results of the consultation to Council, and this is in September, and seek the approval of the new quality assurance processes. So what we'll do also is start implementing the changes in stages for the academic year 2024-25. So this means that in winter 2025 or spring 2026, the providers may be asked to submit their completed annual monitoring template alongside the usual student data spreadsheet. So the annual monitoring will be retrospective by one academic year. So this means that, for example, when we ask for the annual monitoring to be returned to us in winter 2025, the information that we'll ask in this document will relate to how the academic year that has just completed went. So there will be academic year 2024-25.